how did your growing up years influence your ideation now? Reframing myself, does being a first generation person, drive you to be impactful and being inclusive?
Boy, that's a big question. Um, I found that I have these to work in education. There are times when again, if you're going to introduce innovations into the system, and it will cause a wave. That's a nice way to say that.
Mhm.
So there is risk involved in introducing anything new into any system. So one of the things that I appreciate is, being able to ground myself in the why that I do things. And I think I discussed
Mhm.
it at the beginning. And then because that's what's going to enable you to take risk. So what I've discovered is that when I touch a space that has to do with paying forward opportunity and providing education opportunities to others, all of a sudden it unlocks a superhero power where I'm
Mhm.
willing to challenge the system, to redesign process, to work on all these hours, to engage with stakeholders who, normally I would be too nervous to talk to. But I'm willing to
Uh-huh.
do that because I'm grounded in the why. And the moment that I'm not touching that, for example, if it's some different issue, then I feel like I just, I go to my normal self. So all of us have that superhero capability in yourself when you touch
Mhm.
your sense of purpose and your sense of mission. And so I hope in your journey, uh, you'll find what that sense of purpose and mission is that will unlock your superpowers.
It's a lovely question from Aditi Ponakampali, and please, friends, forgive me if I don't do justice to the beauty of your names. Um, she asked a question about, she says, how do you think reforms in identifying accurate measures of a successful economy instead of only financial growth through GDP could increase productivity? And by that, Aditi, at least I'm hearing you say, like, how do we think about measures of success in this domain, beyond perhaps issues of earnings, individual earnings, and general economic productivity? What kind of workforce what kinds of positive outcomes of a workforce ecosystem should we want to be targeting?
So I'm going to give the harder aspect of that to Mitchell to answer, but I'm going to say this. So in the last economy, what we discovered, the last downturn, what we discovered was there was a decoupling between people and productivity, right? It used to be that, you go through a downturn, the companies lay off people and then their productivity would go down. Well, in the last downturn, people were laid off, but productivity held. And so, and when jobs got recreated, they were not the same jobs anymore. There was so much adoption of technology that the nature of the jobs have changed. So as you think about, how to measure, it's so important to think about what is being decoupled, and especially as more and more technologies are introduced at a faster and faster rate, what is the right thing to measure, as you've suggested, Aditi?
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think this is another. I do think that we're at a moment in history where we can ask that question of, okay, if we're going to substantially change the relationship between biography, formal education, and work, what kinds of goals as a nation are we trying to pursue? And I'm all for economic growth and earnings, national economic growth and living wage earnings. But is that all we get to talk about? Are there things like uh, fulfillment, environmental sustainability, stable family lives, commitment to region and community? Are there other positive goals that we can put on the table, beyond just ensuring that people can work to live? And I do think that would, Vaughn, if you have thoughts on that, and what other utilities you would want to pose. and while I'm looking at some of the other questions that are coming through.
I do think we have to think about assets and the ability for people to access assets. My father-in-law worked with Boeing for 35 years, and during that time, the assets conferred upon him were insurance and education and retirement, all of the above. And now, especially as we gigify and fragment jobs, where do we get those assets from that keep us stable, even if we have to change jobs frequently? So structures such like workers' co-op, where you have ownership beyond just the wage that you take home, those are promising features of other countries' economies that is not really prevalent in the U.S. economy.
And Jonathan Rabinovitz asks, we've talked about employers, government, workforce development agencies, and higher ed. What about unions, Vaughn? Where are they on your three-legged stool? Or are they on a different stool, or how should we think about them?
Well, Futuro Health actually has one of the co-founders of the funding that established Futuro Health was very innovative from a union called SEIU, United Healthcare Workers West. So they are a healthcare union. And it's through a collective bargaining process with the employer where they said, hey, we're going to forego an increase in more wages, instead put the funds towards growing the next generation of workers. And that's what the organizations agreed to. And that began, created the funds to establish Futuro Health. The other thing where there have been proven to be really effective is actually scouting and recruiting candidates, because there's nothing better than healthcare workers who are members of their union to go out into the deeply into the communities, use that organizing capability and scout and recruit candidates. And that's why we've been able to bring in diverse adults in a way at a moment in time when they've been shying away from higher education. We've been hitting and beating all of our goals to send and underwrite these students to go back into school at our partner colleges.
Suzanne Dove says, regarding what we should measure, I wonder if career discovery tools have something to offer here. Some tools ask about what people enjoy doing, what they care about, passion and purpose, what environments they enjoy working in. Might there be some ways in which we could sort of build that purpose finding, into tools that might surface those other kinds of priorities for people?
There's many out there. The ones that got a lot of adoption by our colleges and the community colleges was the get focused, stay focused. And the colleges would bring that out to their high school and engage the students early. So, the tools and the content is out there. It's just the intentionality of bringing it out there, I think, is where we fall short collectively.
And Johanna Jebsen asks, competency-based education with its focus on mastery over seat time, its use of authentic workplace-like assessment might be a very viable learning modality, and yet it seems like it has never really taken off beyond a few higher eds like Western Governors University in Southern New Hampshire. How might you see making it more popular and viable in higher ed, or I will add, do you see competency-based models as as a positive way to sort of move these conversations forward?
Well, I have a education icon that is Sal Khan behind Khan Academy, and I recently had the opportunity to meet him because my son is attending his experimental school, which is the Khan Lab School. It's a K-12 school that is working with competency-based education. What's so interesting, he showed up to be on this college admissions panel, and he shared that there is an innovation that came out of the pandemic that is competency-based, and it's called schoolhouse.world. So what they, like how Sal Khan wanted, the whole world to have a free education if they wanted to. Now he wants to have all students be able to access tutoring, free tutoring if they wanted to. And they were trying to answer the question, how do you know that someone is qualified to be a tutor? And the process they came up with was for you to record a video of yourself teaching some topic in Algebra 1 or Algebra 2, et cetera. And then it would be peer reviewed. And then if you got a certain rating, then you would get a credential. Well, since then, you have University of Chicago, Georgia Tech, and MIT now accepting that Schoolhouse World certification as part of the admissions process, because during the pandemic, they had to suspend the ACT and SAT test scores. And what they found was that this credential presented by these tutors who had recorded themselves, it was a good predictor of whether or not someone actually knew the domain of knowledge. So I just think it's so, so that's all like spinning off from mastery-based experimentations that were done. It's not just the WGUs and the SNUs of the world, but, the Khan Academy, and there's a whole generation, that's going to be growing up on mastery-based transcripts, mastery-based education.
So I'm going to take executive privilege here and ask you the final question before we conclude. That is, a lot of the sponsors of this series are, offer conventional 4-year credentials, often, with selective admissions, and are very expensive propositions. But we have long traditions of taking, the science of teaching and learning and research very seriously. What challenges do you have for schools like, Stanford and Trinity? How can we contribute in a meaningful way to the coalition of the willing, as you called it?
Well, I have great appreciation for the sponsors of this academic innovation for public good book series. So thank you very much for organizing this. When Tom Mitchell of Carnegie Mellon University asked me sort of a similar question, I said, where we're challenged is actually the rate of change is compressing, right? Before you would have a breakthrough change, and then there was 30 years to figure it out and ingest it and figure out the training, and then people would be able to partake in the training. Then it became 15 years. Now, every 2 years, now it's every 6 months. So humans are quite challenged in being able to keep up with that rate of learning. And so if the academic world can actually do some research, I mean, what are the methodologies, and are there technologies that enable us to actually learn faster and comprehend faster? And the other dimension, maybe Mitchell, you could talk about, is transitions. I mean, you and I talked a little bit about transitions and how hard they are for us.
Yeah, I've been calling myself for a social science of transitions that would enable people to face them with more than equanimity, perhaps with enthusiasm, and provide tractable evidence-based tools to move from being one stage in life or work to another. I'll turn it over to Matthew to close us up. Thanks, Fun.
Thank you both so much. And what a wonderful theme to close on also, because those transitions are often the source of so much friction for people. It's the spaces in between employer and education where you're caught in the gap among our institutions where the safety net really fails. And if we could really develop more of a life path approach that is more user-centered, more learner-centered, more worker-centered, the institutions could organize their services around those needs rather than us trying to slot into whatever provision we can get from one institution or another, not interoperable, not sharing data. What a fantastic conversation. And thank you, Fawn, for that point about schoolhouse.world. I just found the link to Chicago. That is absolutely fascinating to me. If you can teach something, you really prove that you know it, So for those interested in purchasing a copy of Workforce RX, please visit the website of Book Culture. We'll put a link in the chat. We've got a couple of signed copies available. And I want to remind you about our final event of the year on Wednesday, October 26th, featuring the book From Equity Talk to Equity Walk, Expanding Practitioner Knowledge for Racial Justice in Higher Education. The book delves into change strategies for achieving equitable higher education outcomes and provides guidance on building an equity-minded campus culture. The authors will be in conversation with Anita Davis, Vice President for Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion at Trinity College. Last, please complete our user survey so we know what you think of this series and how we can design next year's program. to be as effective and as compelling as it can be. We'll put a link to that survey in the chat now. And thank you again to Vaughn, to Mitchell, and to all of you for attending and for the fantastic conversation in the chat and the wonderful Q&A as well. Take care, everybody, and have a good night.